your first live podcast? Damn. All right. Cool. I didn't realize that. I'm overwhelmed. So, thanks for being here, everybody. I'm Joe Moore, CEO of Psychedelics today. Very excited to host this first live podcast here at Plant Magic Cafe, Plant Magic Denver on Instagram, which I found out recently. We're going to have a interesting conversation about what's happening in Colorado, what we might hope for the future of Colorado, ethics, puzzles, and much more. So I'm very excited. So on the stage with me, Sean McAllister. I've known you for ages, and through many different incarnations, it feels like. And Sean's an attorney here in Colorado, doing all sorts of interesting cannabis and psychedelic work. No longer cannabis work, right? A little bit. Yeah. All right. If you tempt him. Right. Cool. And let's remember the microphone jam. I like to do something along these lines. Sean was a major contributor to the Prop 122 language around legalization, decriminalization of psychedelics in Colorado. So we have a really great expert to help us. And then we have Meaghan, who is the head priestess. What do you call yourself here?
You can roll with that. We can do that if you want. I founder is
founder.
I like the director, maybe, if we want to do that.
Founder, director. Yeah. And
head witch, maybe. Okay. And I mean that in a complimentary way.
'Tis the season.
Yeah,
it's magical times. Yeah.
So what is Plant Magic Cafe?
Plant Magic Cafe started as a coffee shop, then kind of emerged and helped support Prop 122. We were the headquarters for Prop 122. I actually moved down here for it to be the baseline for our church. Sanctuary of the Sovereign Heart for our ayahuasca-based church, and now it's since shifted into multi-sacramental, and so this building supports that space. And with the passing of Prop 122, we decided to kind of emerge as a psychedelic resource center and offer education and community. So
amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have the amazing Veronica Lightning Horse Perez. Thank you for being here. This is our maybe second time on stage together, which is really great. And known you for a little bit, and always excited by what you bring to the table. So excited for the contribution today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Lots of work. Lots of work. So I was co-chief proponent for Prop 122. So I got to work with Sean and a lot of other great souls in the languaging and the passing and all the work of what it takes to run a statewide campaign in drug policy and changing the way that we really look at these medicines and bringing as much as possible to the awareness that it is also teachers and a very powerful spiritual opener. I am also the leader of a church called The Healing Ground, where we also teach that, the respect. I'm an entrepreneur, mother of 5, working on a couple of books at this point in time, finally, and a big advocate in Native rights and water rights and veteran rights. So I am a very, very busy human being.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are. Yeah. I'm always in awe when I hear about how much you do. And
me too.
How many did I hear you had a couple of dogs earlier?
I have 4 dogs and I have 5 cats.
Perfect. So if you need a place to go, pet some animals.
Well, I have to jump in and just say, what's really cool about this panel is that the 3 of us, before there was a Prop 122, sat in ceremony together and had plant medicine experiences together. And before we talk about regulation and where the future is headed, I just want to acknowledge this spiritual kinship that I have with these 2. And it's such an honor to be on the stage with them. And then that's like the foundation of everything we're doing, because none of us would be here if we didn't have a relationship with these medicines and believe in them and want to share our wisdom about it. So it's really nice to be with you too. And Joe, you can come sometime too.
Maybe. So let's talk a little bit, Sean. I think you're the best person to speak to this. Like, what's the short version of what Prop 122 is or was?
Oh, wow. The short version is it's the most amazing, coolest psychedelic decriminalization regulation bill in the history of mankind, because we're sitting in the freest place in the world tonight for psychedelics. Not just Denver, Colorado, but the Plant Magic Cafe in Denver, Colorado. I mean, this is, clearly the heart and the one of the freest places around psychedelics. And that's because Prop 122 said all adults over 21 can possess and cultivate 4 psychedelics, psilocybin, DMT, iboga, and mescaline other than peyote. And in addition, they can share 3 of the 4. We actually said they could share all 4, but the legislature said, iboga is a little dangerous, so you can share the other 3 other than iboga legally for no money, no compensation. So that's the whole decrim side, and there's a lot more to talk about there. But then there's a regulated access side, which says the state is going to license and permit psilocybin healing centers initially, and potentially those other 3 psychedelics could be added down the road if a lot of things we could talk about happen. Advisory boards and indigenous work groups approve it. But initially, it's standing up a psilocybin regulated program starting at the beginning of 2025. So Oregon's nice and sweet, and they did a regulated psilocybin project, but Colorado's the only place in the U.S. where psychedelics are both decriminalized and also headed towards a regulated program.
2 quick follow-ups. Is it true that the state accelerated their interest in iboga?
Yeah, they took the restriction of adding iboga no earlier than 2026. They took that away, so it could be added at any time. But the truth is, the state is trying to stand up a psilocybin program. It's going to roll out in 2025. I haven't heard a lot of appetite for rushing into iboga next year. It's possible they could do rulemaking for iboga next year, but as I said, the complexity is it would need to be approved by the advisory board and the indigenous working group. And so those groups might take a lot longer than next year. And there's a lot of belief that next year is going to be about making sure the program is working right with psilocybin, maybe refining rules for that. So I still don't see us getting to iboga or the other 2 or 3 psychedelics until 2026.
Right on. And the final one on this front, I try to make a really funny joke about this because I kind of want to test it. But so say, for instance, I get pulled over, you stop and frisk, whatever, like unlikely for me, right? But, cops find some mushrooms in my pocket, like, 2 grams and or a gram of DMT. Like, if they confiscate it from me, is there a pathway for me to sue the police to get it back? I keep saying I can't wait to sue the police for that, but
yeah, I thought you were going to ask a harder question, which is, what is the possession limit for these psychedelics?
That's why I kept my number low.
Really clear. It's a personal possession amount plus an amount you can possess to share with other adults in certain categories. But the answer to your question is, unfortunately, no. There's already been a case where somebody had psilocybin seized, destroyed, and initially they were charged with a crime, but it was dismissed. And they went to the court and said, hey, tell the cops to give me back my psilocybin or pay me. And there are cases from the cannabis world that it's still illegal at the federal level problem that say that because law enforcement enforces state and federal law, that they cannot give you back a Schedule I substance that's illegal at the federal level. And so they also cannot be liable for monetary damages. So right now it looks like there's no recourse if they destroy your medicine.
All right, I've been wrong before and I'm wrong again. But, police and accountability don't always go together. So next up is a question around the ethics and complexities around this whole thing. And Veronica, you kind of were front and center, right in the center of the cyclone for a lot of this, bridging conversations between the indigenous communities and kind of contemporary politics. What can you tell us about that story? 2 minutes or less. Kidding. However much is comfortable.
It has been quite a bit of a challenge because there is a huge gap in being able to understand why the upset is there, and why the anger and hurt is there. When you have anyone come up with a great idea, and this is wonderful, and now I have science to back it, and it really helps people, and we're also aware that this is a medicine that comes from the land, therefore it belongs to all people, while you're also balancing a severely hurt and taken advantage of population that holds the wisdom and has been working with these medicines and never stopped. They never stopped, and people died to be able to keep these practices alive. And to not be consulted on uses and practices, it's something we actually had to write into the measure to make sure that there would be indigenous voices on the rulemaking side. This is where we're at. And these are sacred medicines. And to go from a place where here's a group of people that hold these sacred at the heart level, to another group of people who are popping a pill, going and partying and having a great old time, and that inconsistency there and the lack of respect has been very painful. I will say that there has been many in the community that have taken strides to rectify this. We are still sorely in need of reciprocity. We have an Indigenous working group. I served on one of the Indigenous working groups for a period of time as well, and it was quite shocking, the gap in understanding the frustration and the gap in understanding why things are done the way that they are done culturally. So that is actually part of my mission at this point in time, to bring awareness, not at the level of shame on you, but at a level of, hey, I know that you don't know this, so here's some information that might be helpful, so that instead of focusing on the problem, which we do need to absolutely recognize as a problem, we can also focus on solutions and work towards that end. In fact, for everyone here, NACE is a local community that could really, really use support in this area. The funding that they do for the children to keep cultural awareness alive is massive. Any gap that we can close here is profound and huge and has lasting effects.
Right, I remember you working on protecting a school from closing down. Was it last year? This is really sad. Did it stay open?
No, we completely lost it. And part of it was the budgeting, and the pain point was we need to be able to put in gender neutral bathrooms throughout all the schools, but being able to keep an Indigenous school open, that was not quite the highest priority in the book. So we lost it. We lost it, and we actually lost a student as a result of that, because this was their home in the first place that they felt recognized and accepted. And when they tried to go back to regular high school, their heart just couldn't take it.
Horrible. Thanks for sharing that.
I just think on this topic, it's important to understand that, first of all, there's a broader perspective here. 500 years of colonialism has had the effect it intended, which is it separated communities. Communities don't really know each other, trust each other. So when we came together on Prop 122, we were sitting in a room full of communities that had never really gained trust with each other. And there was a lot of mistrust. And there is a, phenomenon where the dominant culture does not know and respect Indigenous people or Indigenous history. And every Indigenous person I've interacted with, if you show respect, if you show interest in learning and being open to understanding their perspective, they treat you with a lot of respect. But if you come to the conversation like, hey, it's, everybody has the right to use these medicines and I don't care what your tradition is, you're going to create that kind of tension. And that's what we saw in the campaign. But the thing I would say is that the saving grace for Colorado and for any other state doing reform is if you can decriminalize then we take this commercialization argument a little bit out of the discussion, because then communities can come together and grow their own medicine and, work with each other without the fear of law enforcement interference. And I think a lot of those, people that were disaffected by Prop 122, I want to check on them now and say, well, how does it feel that you can legally grow and you can possess and you can share and you can have ceremonies? And my feeling is that they are better off with decriminalization than before. That if people are doing it the wrong way, then that's something we have to deal with. But for people that have a respectful relationship with these medicines, there's never been a freer time than there is now.
Have there been any, what have we seen in the state of Colorado around prosecutions around peyote? Have we seen a number of cases of possession or use or anything like that? No?
Well, peyote is not included in Prop 122. So the fear that decriminalizing mescaline generally would lead to a reduced supply of peyote, I don't think there's any evidence that's happened. Also, peyote has an exception under Colorado law that is not tied to any kind of ethnic identity. It says if you're using peyote for a spiritual purpose, that's an affirmative defense in Colorado. So before Prop 122, we already had a religious exemption for peyote that was not necessarily tied to the Native American church. So that's another complicated part of the argument, but I don't know of any evidence that decriminalizing mescaline has reduced access for Native people.
Yeah, right on. I think it's people like John Mayer wearing like a peyote t-shirt on stage with the dead. Like, come on, dude. Like, there is a really serious ecological issue with a lot of psychedelics, and peyote is one of the hot button issues. Buttons. Didn't notice that as I was doing that. And I think, unless somebody has like a really sincere religious interest, and especially if we're white, we need to stay away. So the supply is not enough to meet the demand of Native American communities right now. And it's to the point where Native American users, North American users, or I guess USA users, are grabbing peyote from Huichol lands in Mexico and decreasing the supply of another tribe. So it's like a, compounding of colonialism. That's just something we need to work on. But there's the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Fund and initiative, which is helping grow that stuff. So I think that's really important. But anything to add on these two topics, Meaghan, from your perspective?
It just in general with the mescaline use and working with that plant, that's why we are big fans of Wachuma, also known as San Pedro here. That's our backdrop actually. And it's because, and why I love that plant is because we can actually, every time you harvest it, you create two of them, right? So you're able to take off the top, harvest the middle for medicine, and then also the bottom will grow another little baby or a couple more. So it's a really nice way to work with these medicines and also share it with your friends and really kind of deter people from working with peyote for sure. So, yeah.
Did I misstep at all?
No, actually, just for the wider audience, you can work with any one of these teachers for years and still not get all that teacher has to offer. And if you have been working with iboga, and you have been working with psilocybin, and you have been working with ayahuasca for years, then there are Native American churches that are open to allowing you to come and sit with these medicines in a traditional way, in a good and respectful way. But there are these medicines, these teachers that grow quickly and plentifully to be able to access. So there isn't like there is a big missing out.
Yeah. We have one of the finest mushroom growers in the world in the room, speaking of. But so how did this whole concept of this place come about?
Plant magic?
Yeah.
Ooh. Guidance, actually. We know each other from Breckenridge, since where I spent 15 years there in the mountains. And the last decade, I was searching for Breckenridge on the water and really trying to find my beach. And the guidance got pretty strong to go back to Denver, and I didn't listen for a couple years. And finally, things just kind of moved to get me here. And within a few weeks of moving here, I knew that it would be for a building or a partner, and looking for both of those to kind of share and journey forth with life. And both happened within 3 weeks. And then the movement continued. And I wanted a larger community for our church and a building, a brick and mortar, because integration, I feel, is one of the most important pieces with medicine. And that's really hard to get out of my living room in Breckenridge. So this coffee shop public portal piece really created more access. And again, Prop 122 was picking up speed. And I remember asking, do you guys, can we give out signs and t-shirts? And they're like, yeah. And next thing you know, we're full on HQ, which was really fun. So the evolution of this building is just, it's kind of become its own entity. I don't have children yet, if ever, and I feel like this might be that setup for me, and just letting it evolve. And like I said, initially an ayahuasca church was the plan, and now it's, oh yeah, we continue to grow, and now we're hosting podcasts. So
right. It's one of like the most medium things that's happened in this room.
Yeah.
But still pretty fantastic, right? Like we had that event I came to with Manesh, and who was the grower that was here with Manesh?
Isaiah Chavez. Mm-hmm.
I got to get connected with him to like do some recordings, because there's some really interesting stuff there.
He's actually, he's been donating all of our microdoses. We're at about 2,000 a month that he gives us to go out to the public, and really incredible humans. So I'm looking forward to connecting you guys.
I liked this whole story. It was compelling. People should check that out, or wait for the podcast, I guess. But so have there been yet any kind of major issues related to the campaign? Like what I noticed was, one of my friends, as this was passing, one of my friends had a really robust legal case against him dismissed. He's not going to do 10, 15 years now for growing mushrooms for a church.
That was my client. There's all the lawyers. No.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, that's how serious it is. When you say major issues, you mean with implementation or
anything? It's not really implemented yet, right? But
I
soon
think
to be.
The problem with the Colorado law is that the regulated side is too expensive and too complicated, and the decrim side has too much ambiguity and too much risk. So you're kind of stuck in this choice, like, do I want to get regulated and spend a lot of money and get authorized and certified, or do I want to live in this decrim world where you can't advertise? And so, as much as I was saying this is the best law of all time, there were compromises involved. And I kind of hate that we're stuck in this, there's a bad downside to each option here. And maybe it's a lesson for future folks, but it's about, we live in this bubble where, first of all, in my bubble, it's a human right to have access to plant medicine, and we don't need government permission, and no human being should ever go to prison for, even if it's recreational use, for changing their consciousness. That's my world. But we're dealing with this broader public, and so compromises were made, like, you can share it with anybody, but you can only be paid for harm reduction services, and you can't sell the medicine. So what does that mean? And nobody's really gotten in trouble for that yet, but the state has sent some warning letters to people and said, if you say you're, a church and you're just selling product, that's just selling product, and we could come after you. And so they've kind of put some fear out there in the decrim world, not just the church, but people that are offering modest services, like, I'll tell you what the strain is, and that's my service. So they've created this kind of fear out there. And then the regulated thing is so complicated that many regular people feel like it's unattainable. So again, we're fixing the car while we drive it. We're working with this dysfunctional culture we live in, and that's the compromise we made.
Yeah, one of my biggest issues, I remember the phone call I got right before it was going to get submitted to the state. I was like, well, you guys missed LSD and a few other things.
Exactly.
I'm like, come on.
Right, exactly.
But, still like wildly progressive relative to where we were before, and like important. Did you two have any kind of like major issues come up for you around the bill, and since it's been implemented, I guess in particular? What's the language? Ratified by the governor? Is that? Yes. Yeah.
I feel the issues have just been within the community. I think that the people that were unhappy with Prop 122, and especially not moving at the speed of trust, was what a lot of the communities were requesting us consider. And then kind of that divided piece where, you know, I even remember talking to Paul Stamets and asking him if you had one piece of information to share with everyone in regards to psychedelics, what would you say? And he said, stop being divided. We're already such a small group, right? And so that really showed me that I wanted to create even more of this reason for us to come together, right? And kind of put aside the differences and understand these are plants that we want to share, and how do we do that ethically? How do we do that sustainably? And that's the biggest challenge in this industry, if some people say, or movement, is that there's no way yet. We're pioneering these precedents. There's no way to do this. So it's, you know, I think slowing down, breathing, and then doing it with community in mind, and trying to stay together, and really just deep breaths. Mm-hmm.
This cost me a lot, personally, a lot. I'm still paying in a lot of ways as a result of my work here. And it's always fascinating to see the struggle to control something that continuously brings us to the awareness that you have no control. It is absolutely a fascinating thing. And when I have definitely got upset about the changing, it's like the voters voted on this. Yeah, well, they didn't know what they were voting for, so we're going to go ahead and change that. But we'll keep it in line with the spirit of the measure.
That initial letter was horrifying.
What's the spirit? What's the spirit of the measure according to you? And at the end of the day, when these things come up, and these problems come up, and these questions come up, and these issues come up, I still keep having to go back to a place of, you know what? These are still pretty good problems to have. We're very upset about how much medicine we're allowed to have, considering, you know, however many months ago you'd go to jail for having any medicine. You know, the cost of what it's going to be, when a few years ago there was no such thing and was never planning on ever being such a thing. Jailable, lose your job and your family offenses. So we're working on it. We're learning, we're growing. Everybody is finding the pitfalls, and that's what happens anytime that you do something new, anytime you do something for the first time ever. And there's still, in the grand scheme of things, pretty good problems to have.
Is it any surprise we turned over regulation of this stuff to a group of people who had no vision, no bravery to step out and say this should be legal? All the advocates had to turn it over to an advisory board, none of whom were on the campaign. The governor appointed a bunch of institutional people that come mostly from the medicalized world. So that's like, these are good problems to have, like Veronica said. But I think what it shows is that culture drives laws, not the other way around. And so the real work that Meaghan's doing and Veronica's doing and people in this audience are doing is building community, building culture. And when the culture has a consensus, these lawmakers, they'll follow suit. Because, you know, I think we are stuck with still a legacy of ignorance and people not understanding what this is really about. So there's a long way to go, but I would just say that the lawmakers have been a little bit in the way, but God, how much farther ahead are we than we were just 3 years ago? And I would say one of the fundamental issues is like, you know, what are we doing here? Is this, I think the dominant culture likes this because they think they can optimize their lives. And what I would say as a spiritual person on a spiritual path is I'm okay if people come to psychedelics because they want to make their life just a little better, or they think this is going to do some specific healing of some specific trauma, which is a real thing. But my real hope is that the encounter with psychedelics will open them to the spiritual path, will open them to their connection with the divine. And that is the thing that's going to fundamentally change people. But maybe I'm naive. Maybe they're all just going to be, spiritual narcissists looking for another bucket list experience. But this is the challenge of where we are.
I've heard that before. Spiritualized humanity. I like it. So, go ahead.
I feel like one of the other challenges when you're speaking about lawmakers is, and how you spoke to it as well, Veronica, is this 2 steps backward after we're saying we're going to go this way forward. And so keeping our eyes on them, our ears listening. And that's one of the things that we've been really trying to focus on here is, with these amendments and these bills that come up, and being aware of how they're really trying to change the laws. And that's been happening, I guess, it's been the last 2 springs that we've had to be on watch. And in May, actually from here, we marched the Capitol on May 1st because they were taking away, or at least trying to take away, our capacity to advertise, which was an interesting spiel on it and I'll let Sean go deeper. But for me, I feel like it's difficult to make these medicines legal and then not have a way to inform and educate the public. Right. And that's one of the other challenges that we've seen with this law is, granted, we were given 2 years to regulate it, right? Or they were, whoever it was that we appointed to figure that out. But in that liminal space, there was no place to go, really. No people that were designated to help the public that was now excited to work with these plants. So I think...
And we weren't really allowed to talk to this committee of
right.
people in any real way, especially as the media.
Exactly. And so just a call to action to just constantly stay informed and stay on it, especially if it's an issue that means something to you, because things can change quickly.
It says a Harry Potter line. I think the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance or something like that. Against Voldemort, of course. Anything to add to the legal
Just want to make sure Meaghan got the credit she deserves, because part of that helping to lead this opposition to this bill, and many other people contributed it would have prohibited any discussion of psychedelics on social media. I mean, and actually the weird thing is, some of us in this room know that these social media companies are trying to limit the discussion, but this would have been a law absolutely outlawing it, and the coalition that Meaghan was a part of helped kill that. So huge moment.
Yeah, I'll name it. Meta took down my Instagram page, 107,000 followers for 3 days recently. And then a week later, took down my Facebook page, 36,000 followers. Just got it back this morning. No way to communicate with them, no way to appeal it. Apparently, I can sue them. I saw a recent successful court case, but I don't super love paying legal fees all the time. But
come on, Joe,
I'm into it. I got a lot of benefit for sure.
I'm just kidding.
Y'all need lawyers, or you're going to be playing in this space. No doubt.
No, but that's
Sean's
a
the best
example.
one.
No, but not just lawyers, but social media is shutting us down. Banks are shutting us down. One of the only insurance companies out there for psychedelics just pulled out.
Oh,
so, I
man,
mean,
really?
All this is a challenge to the space.
I did lose 7 bank accounts in one day. And that was not the funnest day. Yeah. So I wanted to go back to this. So not only did you help one of my favorite people in the space, not go to prison for a long time, but there's another case that I think was helped by psychedelic science. One of my friends, a longtime mushroom provider for me, he got in trouble in a sting. Really, really pretty 22-year-old new cop trying to pick him up and buy mushrooms from him forever. And, after 3 months, she got some. He was, arrested, found a couple pounds in his house. And I think they transferred the case to Denver from Summit. And then the judge and the DA went back and said, okay, how do we do sentencing here? I don't really know anything about mushrooms. Because you might remember this, Breck had this crazy, it was 20 different drug dealers got in trouble in a day or two. It was super nuts. And everybody was looking like they're going to do greater than 10 years because they're egregious. These are not okay drug dealers. And the judge and the DA said, oh, look, these are actually looking really helpful, non-addictive, and look really beneficial. So how do we sentence this thing that's illegal that both of us kind of agree are kind of neat? And he ended up doing a week, a year probation versus 10 plus years, which is priceless. And that's way pre decriminalization, Kevin's project.
Oh, yeah. There have been studies that people who use psilocybin are less likely to commit crime. So why are we prosecuting them? And actually, that was part of the reason in your friend's case why the Denver DA said that she dismissed the case at the end of the day. They have better things to do. But, this is an example of, on paper, people still and you said these dealers maybe who deserve, like, nobody deserves. I mean, if you're giving it to kids or some,
there was violence related to
stuff.
it.
Okay, yeah.
but otherwise,
this is the mentality in America, is that somehow dealers are bad and users are okay, when dealers wouldn't exist without users. And it's just a backwards system that this is proof of how far we still have to go. We still have a long way to go.
Yeah. I don't usually say that about drug dealers. I'm usually a very much a legalize everything and safe supply everything person. But in that case, there was some nasty stuff going on, but not for everybody. Okay, so I kind of want to pivot to this whole religious thing that we have going in this state currently. And Sean, you've done a lot of work on it. I've done a lot of coverage on the religious movements. I think I had like one of the first conferences online about it, which was really fun many years ago. And at that point, we were only talking about single plants, really, or like how can an Episcopal priest set up some sort of situation that works for him and some people he wants to work with. And it's fascinating. I don't know the answer, but he got turned down by his cardinal and bishop, but he found other ways. Obviously in this land, religion and culture weren't really separate for a long time. Like, life was the spiritual path, right? And now, like, having that kind of like abstracted and like, oh, you're only religious when you're over here doing this. Like, that's a really interesting separation of spirit and life, which I think those of us who are like kind of taking it seriously and try to every moment as much as we can. But so I find this interesting, is we have these like new religions, and then we have like ancient religions, and we have some sort of protection. Do we have relatively strong RFRA? This is like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Colorado. Like, do we have relatively strong state RFRA?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh, interesting.
You're actually more protected by Prop 122 than state law under religious freedom. Remember the gay cake baker that went to the Supreme Court?
Was that here?
Yeah, it started here, and the court said that religious beliefs aren't a reason to be exempt from laws of general applicability in Colorado. So you would have a defense in Colorado under federal law. And I want to hear these two more. I've talked too much so far. But the point is that, this religious and spiritual side, by the way, spirituality is bigger than religion. And I think that's the challenge we face, is we have a Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is narrowly tailored to this thing called religion. But most of us have a spiritual life and a spiritual path that is actually bigger than a Bible, bigger than doctrine, bigger than, crystallizing a meaning in advance. And so how's it working for the two practitioners over here? How are you feeling? Now I'm turning into the interviewer.
I just feel really good because you're my attorney. That's what I share with most people when they ask, what are the next steps? I'm like, well, let's call Sean and make sure that you have him in your back pocket so you feel really good with the boldness and the bravery that's required to really be seated in your belief system that these plants help you connect to your God source energy. And that could be something in the sky, it could be the ground beneath us, it could be your higher self. And it's just knowing that is your truth and embodying that. And when that belief system is felt, like we're speaking to it now, that's what I feel like is needed. Now, the legitimacy behind, what Sean has sometimes asked me, why do we need all of these sacraments, we call them? He's like, the DEA is just going to be seeing it as you needing a whole bunch of drugs. So what is your legitimacy there? And it's, well, there's different seasons. There's different times of year. There's different things my body needs in the winter versus the summer. Am I hiking? Am I sitting still? Is it dark? Am I with people? What does my orientation need? And those are all different medicines, right? It's like you don't take ibuprofen for a stomach ache. So why would you take ayahuasca when you're going on a hike and trying to connect with Mother Nature, right? Are you going to go inward? And granted, you can do both in any and all, but it's really about you and what you believe and establishing that, and also being open to it changing. And so I loved writing that in our doctrine. My beliefs are subject to change. Ask me tomorrow. Hopefully it's different, right? Because we're growing.
I reserve the right to change my opinion at any point.
I
I've seen that elsewhere too.
To me, the world that I live in it's a war on beliefs, and wars are fought because of beliefs, and enemies are made because of beliefs. You know, Democrats, Republican, two wings is the same damn bird, but because of the beliefs, that is where the pain and suffering comes from. And to be able to step into the path of spirituality, religion, but open it to, these are medicines, these are teachers, you're not using them, you're working with them, with respect, creating a relationship. In fact, when we begin our practice and our services, when we receive that sacrament, the first thing we do is introduce ourselves. Hello, my name is, thank you for working with me and being here, and everything that went into, and everyone that went into you being right here, little spirit, in the palm of my hand, so that we can begin to work with this teacher on how do I reevaluate my beliefs? How do I give myself permission to have my beliefs and allow someone else to have their beliefs and not feel offensive or defensive or righteous in those beliefs? How do I find my own path? All rivers lead to the ocean. Every single freaking river leads to the ocean. All of these teachers, even the synthetic ones, as my teacher said, they are all different street lamps leading you to the same place. And that place is inside, to yourself, to find the God spark so that you can find the God inside, speak to the God inside so you can speak to the God and the creation outside, the oneness of everything that is. We're all made of the same damn thing, but our beliefs can make that division. Our beliefs can create that separation. So when we bring religion and spirituality about the reaching inside to find yourself with the help of these precious and yes, sacred, whether the mind reveals that sacredness or not, the body sure as hell recognizes it as sacred once that is within your system, because it might be your choice, but the moment that you swallow that down, it's God's law. With our ability to now be able to share the information, and as every single one of my indigenous teachers has ever told me, every physical and mental ailment has a spiritual root cause. And when we have these teachers, these helpers, these spirits to lead us back to that, to find that root cause, to unplug it, to change the belief that has set it in and created the sickness that we see everywhere, every day, in the land and in each other. This is where healing can begin, not only with the individual, but in the earth. The sharing, so that our kids don't live under the fear of there's only 10 more years before the earth is not able to sustain this amount of people. Can you imagine being a young one and hearing that to be true? What future is that? And these teachers, these spirits, bring us back to a place of wonderment and the beauty of the paradise that we get to live in, so that we can nurture it and refresh it and grow it and heal it and consult the elder brother where our wisdom is missing and heal the beliefs that have made us sick.
V, that was so beautiful. Thank you for blessing us with that. And what really comes to the fore is that, you know, I remember being in a ceremony and people talk about European discovery of this continent 500 years ago, and discovery is not over. That there is still a learning that has to take place about indigenous wisdom, and ultimately the cultural and legal fight we have is to get respect for earth-based religious and spiritual practices. Everything we've been talking about here, there is no meaning set out in advance. The meaning is relational. The meaning is reverential in the moment. The meaning is individualized for each person. And the exciting thing about the legal advances we're making is that the courts, in my case, the Church of the Eagle and Condor, and the government have said, okay, we'll respect indigenous spirituality and worldview, And that's a huge sea change. This is how discovery is still happening. And ultimately, what you said about the bird, it has two wings. I have obviously very strong feelings, but what we need is a recognition that hate is not going to cure the hate that we see in the world. Only love can do that. MLK said that. So yes, we have to call out people that are irresponsible and say crazy things, but ultimately my spiritual path says that I'm working for the relief of pain and suffering of all sentient beings, not just the good ones that I agree with or this group or that group, but all spiritual beings. And that this is this indigenous, earth-based, universal spirituality that can heal some of this trauma you're talking about, that can help heal this planet when you see those relationships. So the exciting thing is it's changing, but, the fear is it changing fast enough? But at least it's changing.
As soon as you said spiritual beings, I'm like, oh, nice. He's calling out corporate personhood. But I'm like, wait a second. There's some weird spirits in the corporations.
I
too.
love Elon Musk, too. I love yeah.
I'm working on it.
And also progressives have to heal their relationship with profit, and we have to get our heads around the fact that this may not be the worst thing. I'm not saying a profit-driven system is important, but we're so dysfunctional around profit and money, and we live in a poverty mentality, and we're deprived of the resources we need to actually implement the changes we want. So we have to cure this relationship, this sickness with money. So I'm just calling on all of us to think about that as we do our work.
Yeah. And we're 3 weeks away from the election, so we're feeling that for real.
12 days.
Good God.
Countdown.
Please make it to the polls, Joe. Please make it to the polls.
Man. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? This money thing is a really big deal. And if we don't really own it and understand our right relationship to it, we're not necessarily going to win in the way we could. And because that's a really powerful form of energy.
What I want to say is no matter who wins this election, it doesn't matter. What matters is the work we're doing. What matters is changing the culture. What matters is your spiritual commitment, your devotion to your practice, your kindness to others. This is the thing. These politicians are symptoms of our sickness, not causes of it.
Yeah. So one of the next iterations here around religion is going to be this idea of a multi-sacrament church. And we had a conversation a while ago about what does it look like when it's not plants and it's a few synthetic molecules, 2+ molecules. That's an interesting thing. So we have the first iteration with the eagle and the condor where it's explicitly not very Christian looking and doesn't look like normal church, which NAC kind of had to look like normal church to the American government to get approved, right? And then we have all these new things coming. It's going to be really interesting. So say, for example, somebody's coming forward with an LSD, MDMA, 2CB church, which I would probably join. So if any of you have that, let me know. But, what does that look like in terms of a project?
I'm already working on those for people. And first of all, I also feel this synthetic natural distinction is artificial, no pun intended, that what is synthetic? Everything comes from this planet. Yes, there's a difference between the energy of a earth-grown plant or fungus than a synthetic thing, but I just kind of reject this distinction in a little way. But at the end of the day, the challenge is not really the molecule as much as the risk of the molecule. So the way the government can interfere is showing a compelling interest. So MDMA, for example, has some addictive qualities to it. We can't pretend that it's totally benign. And the government could make an argument that, well, you can believe that's a spiritual religious thing, but the risk of addiction, the risk of dehydration and death, which is pretty small if you do it right and you are properly screened, but that could be a compelling interest. So for all the religions beyond ayahuasca and maybe mushrooms is the next easiest, there's a challenge. With iboga, it's going to be cardiac contraindications. With MDMA, it's going to be addiction and recreational diversion. With LSD, what is the argument against LSD? I don't know, but
I've only heard it's too powerful. Is what
right, because
it's too
there's
small.
no overdose. You can't overdose on LSD.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have but not a. There's no LD50 of LSD.
Yeah, you're like
So anyways, the bottom
suffocate
line
first.
is the challenge is these effects, and that back to this not having an earth-based spirituality recognition from the courts. If they said, these things Meaghan talked about, I want to connect with nature, I want to connect with my higher self, is that enough? A narrow view of religious freedom means you got to give us comprehensive moral and ethical beliefs, and you've got to have accoutrement of religion and clothing and dietary restrictions and all the things Judeo-Christian religions have. So there's going to be challenges to it, but this is why people are playing this game, because the drug war is so dysfunctional. We're speaking to the culture in a way that it understands. Religious freedom is understandable. In the true world of justice, we're not playing a game with fitting a round peg into a square hole. We're just decriminalizing and having broad spread access to these substances. But in the current environment, we're speaking to the only narrow exception we have, which is religious freedom.
And how do we have any sort of faith in the Constitution if the rights can be taken from us to keep us safe? So yeah, anyway, onward. Did you have something?
Well, it's interesting. This came up in an integration group that Sean and I was in this week, and I think there was a woman that actually brought out some Bible verses, and you had them too. But just thinking of, we are of God, right? So anything that we make is essentially of God. And so when thinking about these molecules and these things that are synthesized in the lab, I thought that was a really interesting perspective. And it's like, who are we to say what's living and what isn't, and what is, yeah. And so I do you remember those verses by chance? Do you?
Yeah, there's like 1 John 4:16, which says, yeah.
So good.
I know. Apparently, there's multiple Johns. I didn't even know this, but he who has the light of God within them is also the light of God, and it's just like acknowledgement of the divine within. But it just brought me back to all this discussion. What I was saying is, this is another kind of Zen or Eastern philosophy, which is, if you want to look at it this way, use your enemy's strength against them. So their strength is that they believe in religious freedom. Fine, I'll give you religious freedom. And I don't know, I'm just saying that turns it into a game, and it's unfortunate we have to do that. But this is an example where even this U.S. Supreme Court is going to bend over backwards for plant medicine, because they want Christian-based companies and churches to be able to have lots of exceptions to the law. So this is a way we use their strength against them.
I like it. that was the most compelling one yet from me, Sean. And thank you. This idea of artificial art being the thing. It's like, it comes from, I believe, the Greek, which is like product from people, and who gets the right to declare something other than. Skip that word. You guys can fill it in yourselves. But it's a really interesting and important discussion. And like, how do we figure out, what is good, what is bad? And there was Michael Harner, a famous anthropologist, wrote Way of the Shaman. It was like one of the first books introducing the concept of shamanism to America in a more popular sense. He talked a lot about this idea of a tribe he was with doing these certain rituals. Like, okay, we're going to do the ceremony of this tree. We're going to do the ceremony of this plant. We're going to do the ceremony of this outboard motor. So like, everything has spirit. Everything is spirit. Like you can. I take a lot of really interesting spins. Like, people keep bringing up simulation theory to me, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, cool, but isn't that what the holy books were talking about already? Like, why do we have to like do math? Try to avoid it. But I think there's something compelling there, and this, really smart mathy people are coming to a really similar conclusion. It just took a long time, a lot of harm. So what do we see coming in Colorado? Do you have any kind of projections, or like what are we going to see over the next couple of years here? Chaos? Awesome.
I think we're going to hit a pretty steep learning curve. I think old wounds are going to get flared up, probably flared up pretty hard. I think we're going to get a lot of people from out of state and out of country coming for medicine. One thing I know to be true about energy, however, is that when one person advances, grows, and evolves, it's almost like codes that they're offering to someone else to see what either I didn't know was possible, made possible, or something I didn't believe was possible, made possible, which is going to create a very new narrative all over this country and all over this world, more in a first-hand perspective. So is it going to be messy? Most likely I do see mess, and I also see massive growth coming from that mess. And although, bottom line is, if I'm triggered, that's my own shit that I need to deal with. And I am definitely triggered, but it's my shit. I do what I can, where I can, when I can, and the rest of it, what is that quote? I believe it was even the Dalai Lama. If you're worried, ask yourself this question: is there something I can do about it? If the answer is yes, shut up and do it. If the answer is no, stop worrying about it, because there's nothing you can do. And I have really begun that practice for a while now. And when it comes to the new rollout, I got to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Is there anything I can do about it? Yes, in these areas, then shut up and do it.
Yeah, we had a check-in call a week or two ago, and we talked about this idea of spiritual emergence and emergency, which I think Groff was one of the early characterizers of this in the kind of Western European frame. And there's this sense of like ontological shock that people can go into, like what is truth, what is real at this point. Like I have to really do a lot of work to understand what my new reality is. And this is something that I think is going to happen in increasing frequency. I think, I forget the number. I think we're at like 4x. No, like maybe even 20x psychedelic consumption. Like we're at record levels of psychedelic consumption globally. And in the 60s, we saw a lot of spiritual emergency, which required people getting hospitalized and or taken care of for sometimes upwards of 40 days. And, a lot of active support. And people would come out of it. They didn't need drugs. They just needed to process and reconsolidate and become the new thing that they were becoming. But our culture is not really ready for that. Like I think there's going to be a lot of misdiagnosis and people inappropriately hospitalized and medicated. And Psychedelics Today, Kyle and I have been calling for people to look at what kind of sanctuary can we set up. There was this Soteria house that Kyle used to work at in Burlington, which would take first break psychosis people. And turns out they didn't need to be hospitalized. They didn't always need meds. And they could recover on their own without like radical psychiatric intervention. And I'm a little worried that we're going to see an increase of our people getting treated poorly. Have you all thought about that at all?
I've actually seen it on quite a few occasions,
Mm-hmm.
and it is definitely a concern. I know even with my education level, I was not prepared for the unraveling of my life as a result of meeting with these spirits and these medicines. I am still contending with unraveling, and it's been years that I'm working with these medicines, and there are people that are waking up, so to speak. There's my air quotes, spiritual awakenings all over the place that have no idea what is happening to them, because the journey doesn't end when you go home from the retreat. The journey doesn't end when the medicine wears out of your system. It is a gateway. And when that gateway is open, it's open and there's no going back. And that's part of the reason for the necessity for the churches and for community building, because if it's there and each and every one of you is sharing your stories or your symptoms, then when people are coming back going, what is happening to me? It can be spoken to, because fear is what makes it so awful. If you know, oh, wow, I'm awakening and this is a process and there are phases to this process and I'm going to be okay and the end result is going to be absolutely amazing and I'm going to find internal peace and I'm going to let all this go. Okay, I'm going to be all right. Let me hang in there for the ride. And if you don't know what's happening to you, that is terrifying. And I believe that that is the personal accountability of every single one that is, every single person that is working with these medicines to yes, do your research, have a teacher, set and setting, come on now, and share your story and your process and create a safe space and have a community that you can introduce people to who might be struggling.
Community. I feel like that's one of the bigger pieces with your sharing. And one of the things that we often that it's said in circles is ceremony starts the day after ceremony. And people just understanding that more is unraveling, right? You're in the joy and the bliss often in these weekends and these immersions, and you're with each other. Oftentimes what I'm finding is, especially in this culture that we're looking to create, this psychedelic culture, you know, you think back to the Ken Kesey days, it was like tune in and drop out. Was that?
Turn on, tune in, drop out. That's a Tim Leary deal.
Right. Yeah. And so rather than dropping out, we're dropping in now. Like we're actually ready to process and doing that with each other too. And so creating that culture of belonging. What I'm finding here, especially in Denver and in these medicine communities, people, it sounds like the talking about it and having people to process these journey spaces. And that's what I love about some of our friends and their project at Burning Man is the Zendo Project, right? And really having these harm reduction places that you can go and that you can show up at, and having this community and these practitioners that are volunteering their time so that they can actually be there for the people that are in it. And then now, who are the people that you can go to when you're not in it, right? When you're later, like the week later, the month later, and that, like Veronica is speaking to, is the community aspect. So
I have to do a quick Tim Leary defense, as I always do. Turn in, tune on, drop out. The dropping out of like a relatively not very enriched culture of the 50s and 60s towards a more enriched culture, like community. So it was speaking to your point, but in a slightly different way.
But yeah, and you asked the future here. I think that's our past is Tim Leary, and that created a certain impact. And the hopeful vision is first to remember this is an intergenerational struggle. It took us 70 years to get to this point of criminalization, and now it's changing. We have a sister here from Ohio. You know, Colorado led the way on cannabis legalization 12 years ago for all adults, and now it's legal in Ohio. It's legal in 40 states. We have 2 states with legal psychedelics now. I absolutely believe over time we'll see 40 states with legal psychedelics in one way or another. And I just want to emphasize it's not just important for the United States that this was the country that created the drug war, that internationalized the drug war, that every other country, because of our military and economic influence, copied and criminalized drugs just like we did. We did it better than anybody else. We imprisoned more people than any other country on the planet. But our leadership to dismantle this war we started will also ripple through the world, where it is still very much a problem. Europe criminalizes ayahuasca. They've been recriminalized, I think, in Italy and France recently. And we still have a long way to go. And indigenous people in Latin America, let's not idealize them, because some of them are outcast in their dominant culture of broader communities, and they're viewed as this is the old way, and the young people are attracted to alcohol, and just like in Native American communities in the U.S. And so some of these people are getting arrested coming into our country, and if we can actually make the changes so that a shaman from the Hunikuin people or the Ashanika people or Yamanawa can come to this country and not be detained at the border and not be deported and barred from reentry for 10 years, and they can actually earn money in the U.S., that they can return to their communities, and they can show that these practices are bringing benefit and they can improve their own communities. I mean, this is a ripple all across the world that we can help start, unlike any other country in the world, because of our disproportionate power. So it all starts here in Colorado, and just another 30 or 40 years to go.
Oh boy. So do you think we have time for questions? We're about 7:50. We had so much fun.
So much fun. Up to you. Yeah, let's do a couple.
Let's do like three
Okay.
questions. Anybody want to jump in with anything burning? It's okay if nobody has questions. But nobody's jumping up, so it's okay. We answered all the questions. Cool. All right. Well, we nailed it. So I want to thank you all for doing this. This is super fun. The first of many, I hope. It's my second panel this week in Denver, so hope I can do more. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you all. Let's give this panel a hand. And
Thank you.
cool. And I'm going to be heading over, what's that, Revival next door to hang out for a little while if anybody wants to hang for a bit. Thank you for having us. Thank you all for being here.